дуже дякую. І дякую, що мене запросили. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'd like to thank the organizers and the sponsors, especially the people who put in the hard work before the event. Cheryl from the RAM, Oля, Hristia, Miroslava, Malika, Sonia, and thank you to all of you for coming. And I'm happy to see so many friends here, including some from Winnipeg. About the introduction, for the younger crowd here, if there are any young people, I'm probably better known as the mama of Ruslan, Boyan, and Dobrian, and you know Dobrian from the bands Taran and Zrada. That's when you get to a certain age, you're somebody's mama. I hope you will share your memories later, if we have time, and have some questions that I will try to answer. And remember, while there is the common thread throughout the traditions of Ukrainian Christmas, there are regional and chronological differences. So don't say, that's not what my babunya and didus did. І так не було в нашому селі, то не наше. If it didn't happen like that in our village, then it's not Ukrainian. How much can we cover in about an hour? Cheryl had asked me how long my talk will be, and I asked her, how much time do you have? We'll cover just the basics because there is way too much in this topic. It just goes on and on like Mandelbrot's fractals. And if I jump around from topic to topic, I have to, bear with me. It's all related in a convoluted way. And I hope we have time for a bit of a discussion. So, what makes Ukrainian Christmas Ukrainian? And it's primarily Christmas Eve, Svyat Večer, that we celebrate. Okay, from the audience, what makes Ukrainian Christmas Eve special? Family? 12 dishes, meatless dishes. Svichka? Kutya? Дідух? Колач зі свічкою, okay. Зірка, the звізда that you saw with the performers and the carolers. There's one more thing. Ну, просфора то вже новіша, але ще щось. Something, the koляди, something about the table. Okay. Чесник. One empty plate. Yay. Okay. What would be Ukrainian Christmas without that? Okay, so we have the basics. In no particular order. The star. The special meal. Koляdi, diduch, the 12 dishes. The empty place setting. And what's the obligation of the child or children in the family? Look for the first star, right? Okay, and the table has the kolach and the candle. The food is meatless and non-dairy. Kutya, uzvar. Embroidered tablecloth on the table. I don't know how many in contemporary homes have the hay under the tablecloth and the straw under the table. The carpet wouldn't work, would it? But, okay. No gifts, no Santa, no stocking, no shopping, no turkey dinner, no running down on Christmas morning for gifts, which seems to be nowadays the essence of Christmas, right? At least from television it seems to be. I don't know if they had a chance to print out a handout on Ukrainian Christmas. My youngest son, when he was a student at the University of Manitoba, wrote a piece on Rizdvo for the student paper, The Manitoban, and it was fascinating to see a young Ukrainian-Canadian teenager's perspective on Rizdvo. But first, why am I interested in this topic and in Ukrainian traditions in general? Since childhood, I've wanted to know why. Why we do what we do and how we do it. And rarely would I get an answer other than botak. Because from my mother and my mother-in-law, botak mає бути, botak hodиться. Because that's the way it's supposed to be, because it must be so. And і так все робили. That's the way it's always been done. There had to be more than that. And even as a kid, I kept wondering. So I read and read, and the information is there. You do have to know Ukrainian to read, to find it. In the works of the ethnologists, the historians, the anthropologists, the archaeologists, and the musicologists. And it's not always what people expect or want to hear. So what I have to say may not be to everyone's liking, because the explanations may not be what you've always been told and always believed. There is no subjective undertone here. I just explain objectively what it is. This is the way it was way, 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 way back. And it has come down to us in some form. I did not make this up. I don't think I could have and you could have. Try inventing and explaining Khutya. Of all things to put together, why, right? So all of this information is based on many sources. While the explanations have morphed into over time and place, this is the way it is. Well, I've had quite often when I write about this or speak about this, somebody will say, well, my Baba said that's the way it is and that's what I believe in. That's fine. And I've got a CBC radio Christmas story from Winnipeg. A woman whose family owned a Ukrainian restaurant in Winnipeg was called by CBC Radio to explain about Ukrainian Christmas because a few Ukrainian restaurants in Winnipeg have 3 or 4 seatings for both calendar Sviatvechirs, and they're booked solid. This is for people who, for whatever reason, feel they want to celebrate Ukrainian Christmas, and this is the only way they can do it. So, and this woman just knew the basics and wanted more information. Well, I probably gave her too much. I explained to her the origins and on, and the mother, the babunya, of a long pioneer family, was the owner of the restaurant and the one who ran the place. And when her daughter explained to her what I had told her, I'll use only half the word, the Baba just said, "That's bull." Well, that's not what she knew, even though she had done all the same rituals. The why had been explained to her all this time with the Christian layer. Each Christmas and each tradition is unique to that nation. Italian, Dutch, Old English, Irish, Mexican, Scots, all have their pre-Christian and Christian rituals blended together. The most obvious, Christmas tree, Yule log, holly, and the ivy. Each is to be respected. And I have not had time to do too many comparative studies, but I cannot help but wonder what today's contemporary Christmas has deteriorated into in general. What does all this mean? How old are these traditions? Do we change or adapt them? How and why? Back in, I think it was 1969, the Winnipeg Free Press, one of the editors of New Leisure magazine, Peter Crosley, came across one of my fairly long articles about Ukrainian Christmas traditions, and he didn't even give me a chance to edit them or anything. He just published them, and they appeared on January 6th on the front page of the New Leisure magazine. And the very end paragraph was that we no longer believe the same way in all these old rituals, but we still practice them. That this was then and this is now. Okay, my Kuma Zirka, the next day for a Christmas day, was visiting some friends for dinner. This was a well-educated professional family, and somehow the topic got on this article, and they were very upset. She made us sound like pagans. What does she think? We're more sophisticated than that and all that. And so Zirka says, "What did you do last night?" "Well, we had Sviatvecher." "What did you do?" They explained the normal Ukrainian Sviatvecher. And she says, "Well, case closed." So that's the way it is. People still practice. By discussing these prehistoric origins and symbols, I am in no way diminishing nor taking away from the Christian feast, just that our traditions are so much older and have remained with us over many thousands of years. Christianity in Ukraine is over 1,000 years old, from 988, and Christianity itself is just over 2,000 years old. In comparison, how long have modern human beings lived on earth and had lives and beliefs before Christianity? And then you think that in other parts of the world, Christianity is not the main religion. And I also don't like to use the term pagan in denoting what was the faith or beliefs of people before Christianity was accepted, because it has a negative connotation to most people, except once when I was explaining this and said paganism has a negative connotation, I had a pagan come up to me and tell me that I insulted him. I don't know. So, the term I like to use is pre-Christian. This is a chronologic term rather than judgmental and subjective. By explaining the background of why we do what we do, the rituals of Ukrainian Christmas become clearer. A bit about tradition first, because this puts everything in context. I have to talk fast. Without tradition, we could just order in pizza or Chinese food for Christmas Eve and save our mamas and babas all their work, yes? No. I think the mamas and the babas said yes. What is tradition? It is the transmission of knowledge, opinions, customs, practices from generation to generation, originally by word of mouth, oral tradition, and by example. Also, tradition is that which is so transmitted, a body of beliefs and usages handed down from generation to generation. What is custom? In this case, it is the habitual practice of a community of people, the usual manner that they do or act. Custom is for the nation what habit is for an individual. So ordinary everyday actions are repeated daily, and we're talking not about contemporary human beings, but the earliest Homo sapiens. In time, these actions, no matter how minor, are habitually done the same way. Now they're habits. With the passing generations, many generations, the purpose or significance behind particular actions become lost, or the actions themselves become unnecessary or obsolete. But nevertheless, they are still carried out without anyone questioning their meaning. Botak maya pute, because it's supposed to be this way. What were once habits of individuals have become customs of a clan, a tribe, a nation. The customs have an importance far above the actual actions themselves, specifically because they originated with one's ancestors. Through the centuries, the less significant customs have eroded or disappeared, while the major ones remained. These are the ones connected with family life, birth, marriage, death, and with the seasonal changes of nature. The solstices, equinoxes, sowing in spring, harvesting in early fall. And the winter solstice, the shortest day, the longest night, is the winter celebration now generally celebrated as Christmas. And the point of the winter solstice is this is the shortest day and the longest night, and tomorrow the day is that much longer. So the sun and summer will be coming. The sun will return. Because in the winter the sun shines but it doesn't warm. And to people this was very important to have the sun come back. In Ukrainian, the root for is the same for two words. Zvichka is habit. Zvichai is custom or ritual. Obichai is another word for rite. Ohienko writes that zvichai is the regular voluntary repetition of a social act. Zvichayny is an adjective indicating ordinary, everyday, regular. And I was trying to find the etymology of the words with the root zvichai, obichai, and in the etymological dictionaries, it said загально прийнятої етимології немає. There is no generally accepted etymology for this word. The origins of these rituals are in the deepest reaches of human memory. We're talking Old and New Stone Ages, Paleolithic and Neolithic. And of course, over time, the meaning behind these strange, even eccentric and downright weird actions have been lost and warped. But we still do them. Why are Ukrainians so traditional? A predominantly agricultural society is very traditional. and we're talking, 16, 17, 1800s and earlier, things don't change much from one generation to another. They're not supposed to. You do what your parents and grandparents did, and you believe what they believed, and your children will follow. Any deviation from the norm was frowned upon. The village was a haven for conformity and must have been hell for a nonconformist. And yet, it is because of this conformity that so many centuries and generations later we still have our traditions. With everything modern, industrialization, education coming, and modernization coming along, and the old way of life with its tradition falling as the first victims, somehow, in our case, tradition remained. During the centuries of serfdom, invasion, foreign rule, exile, war, persecution, and terror, the traditions were an island of security to the people, something that kept them going. Our pioneers managed to scrape together something for a Sveta Večera during their first Christmas in the burdej, or the dugout in the bush on the prairies. I remember my parents reminiscing about the poor but special Sviat Večer in the DP camp in Berchtesgaden in post-war Germany. We hear stories from the dissidents who were in the Siberian concentration labor camps, for whom Sviat Večer was that pause of hope in a hopeless place. And kutya was grain hoarded over weeks from daily porridge rations. They lit a candle, sang koledy, which carried from cell to cell in the prisons, and as one woman dissident wrote, as they did this, I Ukrajina bula z nami. And in that moment, Ukraine was with us. The soldiers of UPA, the Ukrainian insurgent army of World War II, which fought both the Nazis and the Soviets, they celebrated in their underground bunkers in the forests and mountains. But it was not that the traditions kept the people going. These traditions were just there, present wherever Ukrainians were, and their power was so strong that despite war, persecution, and other national tragedy, the people still practiced them. If you are of Ukrainian origin and feel Ukrainian, no matter where in the world you live, Brazil, Vladivostok, Bosnia, Australia, North America, wherever, you will celebrate Christmas with at least a touch of the Ukrainian Sviat Večer. My kum, a godfather of one of my sons, was teaching in the Cameroons in Africa. He and his wife are fourth generation in Canada. Before Christmas, she and her household help, which you get when you teach in Africa, sorted through the chicken feed to collect enough wheat and other grain to have kutya. She had brought the poppy seeds from Canada. This was quite a few years ago when it was still okay to do that. They certainly did not have to do this, but they had to. People who are generic, whatever, and have become so assimilated into North American society that they have no ethnic traditions of their long-forgotten roots, try to create their own. And many magazines and websites have articles about create new holiday traditions this Christmas. We don't have to. We're fortunate that we have our own. Even though I may not be able to trace my family roots back over too many generations, I feel perfectly satisfied and secure that my roots as a Ukrainian go back as far as human history on the territory of present-day Ukraine. One among many differences between the regular North American Christmas as Ukrainian Christmas is Ukrainian Christmas does not begin until Sviat Večer, until Christmas Eve. It does not happen right after Halloween or right after Thanksgiving with the Christmas sales and shopping. And you don't play carols like today. This is a special event of the Ram, but traditionally you would not be singing koledy until Sviat Večer. There are other days in December with their own rituals. Andrea y Katerine, St. Andrews and Catherine on December 13th with all the fortune telling. Then St. Nicholas, Svetoga Mikolaya on December 19th. And I guess this is the only real Christian saint or holy day that's part of the Christmas calendar. Regional differences are many, of course, based on geography and whatever. And the foods can be varied, but the basics are the same. And there are 3 days of Ukrainian Christmas, not one. And the second day of Ukrainian Christmas is not Boxing Day. It's Bohorodici, or the Mother of God, and the third day is St. Stephen's. Then we have Malanka, New Year's Eve, Nový rok, Štedrý večer, and Toronto sure knows how to put on its Malankas, right? Yordan, we celebrate Yordan, not Epiphany. Epiphany is when the 3 wise men came, and Yordan for us is the feast of Christ's baptism in the Jordan River by John the Baptist. Playwright Nick Mitchell, one of his plays about Ukrainians in Manitoba, he has the French Catholic bishop of St. Boniface looking out on the Red River in the late 1890s and saying, "There goes those Ruthenians cutting the ice again on the Red River." That was for the cross. In Winnipeg, with the large population of Ukrainian descent, the city keeps Christmas through January 7th. In the supermarkets, the city street lights, Christmas lights are up. Great West Life leaves their very large magi on their building until after Ukrainian Christmas. Everything remains. And Malankas have become now a commercial venture, where at the Winnipeg Convention Center, some guy puts on Malankas because a lot of people come, just because. The people living on the territory of Ukraine in earliest human times were not Slavs, as Ukrainians are, but they remained on their land, and whatever they knew and had was passed on and blended with the succeeding peoples to migrate to this land. The Paleolithic and Neolithic aspects of Ukrainian traditions are just too obvious to ignore. And just as with Aboriginal populations from time immemorial, it is the oral tradition that passes on knowledge and custom. You may be wondering if it's really possible that all this could have come down to us so directly if human beings over the millennia were not our direct ancestors. But they were. Archaeologist Mikhailo Videyko writes about this in his book on Tripilya, Шляхами Трипільського світу. He notes that Oleksiy Nikitin of the University of Michigan in 2005 analyzed the DNA of human bones uncovered in Verteba Cave in Ternopil province. The bones dated to 4500 4000 BC, the late 4th and 3rd centuries BC. I'm not qualified, much less to understand much of this DNA, especially written in Ukrainian, but from what I did gather, the mitochondrial DNA included mutations of the H group, the most widespread in Europe, found already before the Ice Age, which means during the Paleolithic, about 10,000 years before the appearance of the Tripilians. The Tripilya era find in Verteba Cave did not include the TJ mutation, which includes the population of the Middle East, the first agriculturalists. These would have differed from the hunter-gatherers. So the lack of the TG agriculturist DNA mutation can mean only one thing. Ancestors of the agriculturalist Tripilians of the Verteba Cave were descended from the ancient Paleolithic population of Europe, which lived in this area since the glaciations. This is preliminary data. The agriculturalists remained on their land when the Slavs arrived. They intermingled, and our customs have been passed on from those earliest human times. The symbolism of everything, absolutely everything in Ukrainian tradition, food, costume, folk art, the embroidery, whatever, is mind-boggling. Everything has a symbol. Everything means something other than just what it is. How do we know where the traditions began? From folklore, which is the oral tradition of the people. This is the same worldwide. Before writing, the beginning of history when stuff is recorded, everything is prehistoric, before history. The incantations, lamentations, proverbs, ritual songs of the annual cycles of nature and their accompanying rituals, these are the records of the deepest past. We can now take ourselves back to earliest human times, the times of hunter-gatherers, the Ice Age, Homo sapiens, cavemen and women on the territory of Ukraine. Think Gene Owell's Clan of the Cave Bear, Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon human beings, 35,000 to 20,000 years ago. Human beings of this time lived in large extended family groups, the clan, Rid, in Ukrainian. But not only humans belonged to the clan. All aspects of nature were part of it too. Victor Petrov wrote that all natural phenomena were perceived as acts of coming and going, the coming and going of kinfolk, kin, ridni. The extended family were the stalks of grain and the mammoth which let itself be hunted. The belief that every manifestation and object of nature has a soul and is alive, and that by communicating with that soul in certain ways, man can somehow control its behavior, this is a concept called animism. Knock on wood, what do various sports people, sportsmen do before a game? They do certain things because they think by doing that they will ensure that something will happen. Rain dances. All these things, all these proverbs, all these things mean something because you're wishing to make it so. And you think that by saying or doing something, you will at least urge something good to happen. So a good hunt, a good harvest, whatever. The clan believed that those who had died did not die, they departed, to return in spirit to be with the living members of the clan during the year. These departed ancestors lived in the rivers and lakes, forests and fields. They would be called with special ritual songs and motions to return as needed. Ancestors were worshipped and honored because they protected and cared for the living. It is interesting that the Ukrainian word for paradise to which the souls departed is rai, a pre-Slavic word, pre-Christian, which the Greek paradeisos could not replace, even in church. Rai, related to Viri, where the birds fly to in the fall and to return in the spring. And the word rid, rodina, kin. You have rodina, roditisa, rodici, it's all together. So it's a whole unit. And the rid is comprised, the family is comprised of the living, the departed, and those yet unborn. This concept is reflected in Shevchenko's poem «І мертвим, і живим, і ненародженим землякам моїм в Україні і не в Україні моє дружнє послання». My friendly epistle to my dead and living and yet unborn countrymen living in and outside of Ukraine. Okay, this is a very long-about way to get to Christmas. But why am I talking about dead people for Christmas? Because there is that empty place setting at Svyat Verchin, and it's a very important part of this evening. The reverence for ancestors and those who cannot be with us that night indicate, wait, messed up a page here. The reverence for the ancestors and for anybody from the family who cannot be with us that night is that empty place setting and the empty chair. And it is not morbid. It is, I don't think Ukrainians think of it as, oh, gee, that dead people chair. Not at all. Somehow it's comforting to have your parents, your grandparents, whoever else in your family had passed away, there with you that night. And it's a good feeling. And my children never found this morbid at all. It's just they were the ones that set the table and, to dla babuni, to dla didusia. And the food on the plate is placed on the plate, and that food may not be removed before morning. It was a very grave, bad thing, a sin, was a transgression to remove that food before morning because the souls are with you all night. And they will eat or, have fun during the night. Sometimes the food was placed on the windowsill. So we have this indication of the whole family coming together. Then the yiduch, which was the sheaf of wheat of the best grains of the harvest, and the spirits of the ancestors who were helping out with making sure the harvest was good, came into the home in the sheaf of wheat. And the yiduch, Did is grandfather. Interesting that in some regions of Ukraine, it's not called the Yiduch, but it's called Baba. So, One thing I still remember doing as a kid was, before you sit down, what do? You brush your chair. Because there are so many souls in the house that you may sit on one. So before you sit down, you brush your chair not to sit on any soul. The house is full of them. And on the table, you have the kolach and a candle. Sometimes you have 3 kolachi, one on top of the other, an embroidered tablecloth, garlic cloves in each corner of the table, under the tablecloth. Poppy and hemp seeds were sprinkled into the hay under the tablecloth long ago. Ah, hemp. I have a lecture on hemp. This was the oil used specifically for Sviat Večer. Rjažene olije, cooked or sautéed in or drizzled with hemp oil. The word used oli, you know exactly what they're talking about, and that it is hemp oil. It was used at the dressing for most of the 12 dishes, not only for its taste, but also for its symbolic value, being one of the earliest and most important cultivated plants for life. Xenophon Sosemko notes that when the foods were prepared with hemp oil, the verb used was rjaženja or zarjaženja in the context of ritual. For example, it's used in other ways too. A bride was narjažena do vinca, ready or dressed for the wedding. A groom was narjaženi when he donned his fancy wedding hat. And a deceased person was narjaženi when prepared and dressed for the funeral. You didn't use this word for everyday use, other than special. People in the Paleolithic lived by hunting and fishing and by gathering fruit, berries, seeds, digging roots, and whatever else was edible. They moved from place to place with the seasons, migrating animals, and the availability of food to gather. Think of the foods at Sviat Večer and how they contrast to the ones at Velykdien or Easter. We'll get back to that. Times have changed. Long ago in the villages, children used to visit their relatives and their baba poveducha and godparents, the midwife and godparents, neste večeru, because every immediate family stayed in its own home for Sviat Večer, but the kids would gather up a bit of everything and take it to their relatives or whatever and get goodies in return and then come home. Nowadays you have the whole extended family celebrating in one place. The hunter-gatherers depended upon the lunar cycle rather than the solar one. The moon and stars guided them. The lunar symbolism is there in the cloves of garlic, which are crescent-shaped, under the tablecloth. The fish, much fish is used in Sviat Večer, and fish is a lunar symbol. And also the crescent-shaped vareniki, the pierogies. The 12 dishes represent the 12 cycles of the moon around the earth. They are meatless, non-dairy, because the animals are also members of the extended family, and for this special evening of unity, it would be inappropriate to eat. Before the family meal, a bowl with a little bit of all the foods was taken to the barn to share with the animals and the bees. Nowadays, I've heard of people doing this ritual with their pets. Also, the reason for the meatless meal is a respect for the family animal members and the non-dairy. The non-dairy part is animals had not yet been domesticated. So how in the world would you get dairy products? Were you going to run after the elk or the mammoth to milk it? No. So there wasn't any milk. And since this Sviat Večer has its roots in Paleolithic, there just isn't any milk. And yet for Easter, which is much more an agricultural feast from the Neolithic, you have your wealth of dairy products and ground grain products, all the breads. Whereas in the Neolithic, in the Paleolithic, you did not grind anything. You didn't have enough to grind. And family animals are part of the whole family, as shown in the sharing of food before the family sits down. The Hutzule had a wonderful thing, also done before the family sat down to eat. Before the meal, the husband and wife stood outside the door, holding a bowl with a little bit of all the foods of that evening, and 3 times they recited this invitation to the storms, lightning, hurricanes, all the bad things of nature, and the wolves and bears and other predators to come for supper. They repeated that 3 times. And then, if you're not coming tonight, don't come for the rest of the year. Again, making it so. The foods of Sviatvecher vary from region to region, and in some areas there were 17 dishes. Some are basic. Kutya, the most important dish of the evening, is the oldest, dating back to gathering. Those precious gathered grains were too few to eat often. They were saved as very important. People recognized that they gave you extra strength. They were cooked into a porridge for this meal. Poppy seeds and honey are both original instant foods. You don't have to do anything to them. We do grind the poppies for this meal. They were mixed in. This was considered the food of the gods. Uzvar, the compote of dried fruits and berries, was the drink of the gods, and that's usually served at the end of the meal. An indication of the antiquity of Kutya is the fact that the grains are whole, not milled, not ground. It symbolized with the poppies fertility, prosperity, and a good harvest. In contrast, the Easter breakfast is so Neolithic, so agricultural. You have many breads, grain is already milled into flour, butter, cheeses, meats, and the meats are from domesticated animals. Interesting that there's a variety of kutya that is served at funerals. Even now, I don't know about Toronto, but in Winnipeg, it is still served at funerals, at the meal after the funeral. But it is only wheat and honey with no poppy seeds. It's called kolevo. Poppy seeds symbolize fertility. And if you're dead, you don't need it anymore. It's not going to help. The other foods of this evening are also basic. Mushrooms, root vegetables, some later foods from agriculture, but very little processed, like ground stuff. More just as it is. The kolach, what's interesting, the kolach is there as a centerpiece and is not eaten as part of the meal. It symbolizes the sun, and the star in it symbolizes the sun. And the regional differences, Marina Antonovich Rudnitska, who was from an intellectual family in Kyiv, told me that as sort of an upper class family, their meal consisted mostly of varieties of fish. The vareniki were peasant food. So they had all this fish from the Dnipro in many varieties. And the fillings for vareniki, for this meal, are quite a few, including the sauerkraut, probably not potato long ago, because potato only came into Ukraine from South America. At the end you have the berry vareniki, which are very special. Kapusta, the sauerkraut, in many varieties. Salamacha. You have the mushroom sauces, of course. And among the hutsuli, and maybe there's some hutsuli here who can tell me, one of the foods is kokoshka, which is corn that is somehow, I don't think it's popped, but it's baked or something. But it's called kokoshka. Any hutsuli? It's not cornmeal. It wasn't ground. That would be kulesha or other things. But kokoshka was a special hutsul meal. I still have to find that out. Of course, there's kompot at the end, pastries, medivnik, honey cake, and the drinks. Mead, horilka, vino, and there are some people who get very upset about drinking at Sviatvecher, as if Ukrainians did not drink at festivities. And in the carols, you always have the koledniki asking for, for all the drinks to be passed around to the singers. And even in the carols, you have zelene vino v nedilju rano sađeno, the green wine was planted. And I found out finally that zelene vino means grape. Green wine is not only green wine, but it's also the word for grape. The layering of the Neolithic, the New Stone Age, and the beginning of agriculture and settlement and domestication of animals had that people no longer had to migrate to follow food. They could grow it. So that's why the kolach is in the center of the table, and the giduch has the best grains brought in. But the spirits of the ancestors were there earlier. The agricultural symbolism continues with the hay under the tablecloth and the straw under the table. And no, it did not mean the manger, just as the 12 dishes had nothing to do with the 12 apostles, but with the 12 months of the lunar cycle. What did apostles have to do with Christ's birth anyway? They weren't around yet, right? On top of this is the Christian layer, the birth of Jesus, celebrated, and there's still discussion about when during the year Christ was born. They haven't decided that, but it was blended with the winter solstice celebrations. The Kolede and Shtedriuke, the carols and the New Year songs, are a great example of the dualism, the dvoyavirya of the pre-Christian and Christian celebration, a layering of both within one song. Often the verses are pre-Christian, but the refrain is Christian. Syn Boży narodził się, or Oj daj Boże, sometimes it's Oj dasz Boże, and Boże can refer to the old sun god or the new Christian god. And with Ukrainians, there has been no need to revive caroling, as quite often in North America, people, every so often, let's revive caroling. It's always been there among Ukrainians. The themes of the Kolede are fascinating, about creation, not in a Christian sense, but in how early human beings imagined the earth happening, philosophical ones on lessons on how to live, about earliest humans, earliest families, fibers, foods. There are the medieval ones from Kiev and Rus, about kings, knights, battles, princesses. The blend of the Christian and pre-Christian. Romantic ones, very many koledy and shtedriuke are about courting and hoping somebody gets married, very many of them. Practically in almost any one of the old ones. Then there are specific kolede for every member of the family, including the young people courting. There's a special koleda for anyone who passed away during the past year. There's a koleda for the, and this is, many of them, but I'm just giving examples, for the widow and orphans, for the beekeeper, the young man or woman who may get engaged or married that year, for the priest and his wife, and I found a few for the Jewish storekeeper in the village. When they went caroling, they visited him too. And when the people went caroling, it's not like today. You come in, you sing, you recite the verse, they give you cookies and a drink, and you take the check, right? But long ago, the koledniki were served a meal in every home and drink, then were given the gifts, and among the hutsule, they also danced for you, the koledniki. Special sort of a dance shuffle where the men moved from side to side like this, and the koleda is more of a recitation in rhythm, but that's called plesovanya. The koleda was a ples. That's fascinating. That's very, very old. Volodymyr Shukhevich recorded, I think that it was that in 1907 or 1909, the Hutsule in one village sent a letter of protest to the bishop because their probably new in the village priest would not permit them to go caroling the way they had always done. I guess he didn't like the pagan ritual and told them they can only sing certain songs. This is in 1907. And every so often now we have priests who don't want the pagan kolatki sung in church, only in the church basement. And I've heard that in a few cities. And in one city where I was speaking about Kupalo rituals, about the Midsummer Night, the priest told his congregation that they should not go to my lecture because I'm encouraging pagan stuff. People still came. The Christian Christmas carols are a very small percent of the mass of koletki and shtedriuke. So Christian, and then volumes and volumes of pre-Christian. There is no yelping in Ukrainian carols or Shtedrivki. The Volhyni album that came out with their caroling, they have the women, вони скавулять. You know, there's this yelping and shouting and everything. That is very irreverent. And I have to say that something that really bugs me is it came from Ukraine a few years ago. The dancers, whether here today or in Winnipeg or in other parts of Canada, they're squealing and shouting and yelling, especially the girls. You know, the squealing, that has nothing to do with Ukrainian dancing and with anything. It sort of takes away a lot. It's not as dignified. And yet, it came from Ukraine, therefore it's good. But it wasn't traditional in Ukraine. Whatever that is, I have no idea. There, rant finished. So many beautiful Canadian and American choirs, as well as those from Ukraine, and with independence, now we have such a beautiful wealth of Kolyady recordings from Ukraine, where under Soviet times they had to hide them. I remember the one beautiful album was labeled just Narodny Pisni, and it was all beautiful Kolyady. But now we have a wealth. Also, the Kolyada festivals are a wonderful thing. In Winnipeg, we have, at the Cathedral of St. Vladimir and Olha, all the Ukrainian choirs of the city come together and sing, and it is absolutely glorious. And I know in Toronto you have quite a few. And it's important that we go out into the mainstream the way we did today, because we have to share our culture. Vinchuvanya, the reciting of these special verses of well-wishing. They're lovely poetic verses, wishing you and the family all the best in the new year. They're exaggerated because everything must be the best, everything must be gold and silk and just over the top wonderful. And wishing it makes it so. I don't have time to cover Vertep, which is a Christian layering onto various folk figures. But that was the manger carried around, the wooden portrayal of a manger carried around along with the carolers from house to house. One indication of how things changed is that Novy Rik, the new year, was not always in January. The New Year song Shtedrik, about the swallow returning in the spring and all the farm animals being born, that indicates that it's a spring song. And a ritual that farmers still did in January was they would plow one little furrow in the frozen ground, because originally Novy Rik was, New Year was in the spring when the ground was plowable. So that's how you see that things shifted, and even though the time has changed, the rituals have remained. Posivanya, on New Year's morning, very early, the little boys would come around to the house and throw wheat grains to all the walls, wishing you a good harvest for the new year. Malanka, New Year's Eve, Malanka and Vasil, and here you have again the layering of Christian and pre-Christian, because Vasil is St. Basil. His feast day is on the 1st of January or the 1st of the new year. And now it's Vasil and Malanka. And there's a lot of mummery involved in that, and that we have in Indo-European cultures all over Europe, and especially in Newfoundland, where it was brought. And you put on masks and all kinds of silly stuff, but that's going back, way, way back. I mentioned Yordan, the blessing of water, and water and fire have always been very important, even before Christianity, so there's a blend again in that feast. It's interesting that pioneers on the prairies maintained what they could in such a different environment among people who looked down on them, but Ukrainian Christmas continued, and in some supermarkets, for both Christmases, by the cashier you will find bags of poppy seeds and whole wheat and honey just waiting for you. You can pick it up in case you forgot. You know, pay food fare or whatever supermarket it is. So we have the blend of the old and new, and we are different from our ancestors. We live in a totally different world with different beliefs, lifestyles, and values. We no longer believe that the return of the sun depends upon our songs and motions, or that the crops depend upon the incantations and ritual songs. But I am sure that the matriarchate is still alive. We cherish the traditions willed to us as a precious gift, which through an accident of birth we were privileged to receive. And our children have it as their heritage from us. Дякую.